Welcome to the Library Reads Virtual Book Expo 2020 Author Interviews. I'm Rebecca Vanook, the Executive Director of Library Reads. Normally, I'd be greeting all of you at BEA in New York City at our evening and lunch author panel events. Since those are canceled this year, we still wanted to find a way to try and connect you with these great authors and their upcoming books. This is video 2 of 2, and this set represents authors who would have been at our BEA lunch panel. You can find a list on Edelweiss for ease in requesting and downloading advanced reader copies for all of the available titles featured in these videos. The URL is there on your screen, bit.ly/libraryreadsBEA20books, and that link will also be available on our website and on our social media channels. You can also reach out to the various library marketing teams for more information and for copies. You'll find those contacts on our website, libraryreads.org/resources. Thanks so much for joining us for these brief author chats. We hope you enjoy them. Jennifer Nansabuga Mukumbi is a recipient of the Wyndham Campbell Prize, and her first novel, Kintu, won the Kuani Manuscript Project Prize in 2013 and was longlisted for the Etislett Prize in 2014. Her story, Let's Tell This Story Properly, was the global winner of the 2014 Commonwealth Short Story Prize. A Girl is a Body of Water is a sweeping and powerful portrait of a young girl and her family, who they are, what history has taken from them, and, most importantly, how they find their way back to each other. In her 12th year, Kirabo, a young Ugandan girl, confronts a piercing question that has haunted her childhood. Who is my mother? Her journey to reconcile her rebellious origins, alongside her desire to reconnect with her mother and to honor her family's expectations, is rich in the folklore of Uganda and an arresting exploration of what it means to be a modern girl in a world that seems determined to silence women. Mukumbi's unforgettable novel is a sweeping testament to the true and lasting connections between history, tradition, family, friends, and the promise of a different future. Hi, Jennifer. Thanks so much for talking to me today.
Hi, Rebecca. Thank you for having me.
So I'd like to dive right in to talk about your upcoming novel, A Girl is a Body of Water. It comes out September 1st, 2020 here in the US.
Yes.
Can you share with us a little bit about the story, the plot line of this book?
Okay, yeah. The story is about Chirabo, who is growing up with her grandparents. When she gets to 12 years old, she realizes that her second self, because she has two selves, so her second self starts flying out of her body and she gets frightened. And somehow she connects this to the absence of her mother because she has never met her mother. And so she starts to think that perhaps she's a witch, and that's why her mother, abandoned her. So she decided to visit the local witch, like you would. And unfortunately, the witch seems to be waiting for her. And she says, of course, I can find your mother for you, and I can get rid of your second self. However, before I do, I need to explain why you have a second self and why she flies out of you. And it's going to take a long time. You need to keep visiting me for a few times. So she starts visiting, not realizing that she's being ensnared.
Got it. So tell me a little bit about what inspired this story. Is this part of Kenyan folklore or Ugandan? Correct me. Is it folklore? Is it legend? Or is this something you just came up with all out of yourself?
Okay. It's the story itself is not folklore.
Okay.
But it uses folklore, especially folk tales and myth.
I wondered. Okay, got it.
Yeah, to to tell the story. But Chirabo herself does not come out of mythology. Her family does not come out of mythology. But the witch uses oral traditions, like legends, like sayings, like myth, and especially folk tales to help Chirabo understand why she flies out of her body. But what inspired me initially was actually, I wanted to talk about our childhood, a childhood that is traditional, that is in the rural, or what you would call the countryside in America, that is in the open countryside. And the idea of the West has not infiltrated in it. But then along the way, I start to wonder what kind of childhood then my grandmother had. What kind of childhood did my mother have? Or my grandmother's sisters, or my mother's sisters and my father's sisters. And I start to explore that, and then it grows into something bigger. It becomes a feminist story. But initially, I had wanted to just explore, just to write about childhood.
Mm-hmm. Got it. So what do you hope that readers will take away from this story and these characters?
Well, I hope that people would take away at least 4 things that I'm trying to talk about. One of it is traditional African feminism that is indigenous, that arose out of their specific experiences. So what happened was that when, I think for me, it was perhaps 1980s, but for my mother and my aunties, perhaps it was the 70s, when Western feminism arrived in Africa. And it was so organized and so written and so sure of itself. It kind of overpowered the indigenous ways of thinking about women and womanhood that had been growing, that had been growing organically.
Yes.
And so, because of course whatever comes to the West tends to be more sophisticated, more what was budding as a feminist thought and feminist reaction among traditional societies was overwritten and was overwhelmed, and it fell away. But what has happened with Western feminism, especially in Uganda, is that it has been rejected, not just by men, but by women. So the patriarchy claims, that feminism is not ours. They are just westernizing our women, as if women had not felt their oppression or their repression. Okay, so I wanted us to go back and look at that feminism that is recorded in oral traditions. That's the folk tales, the myth, the legends. So that was one thing that I wanted people to walk away with. The other is that, again, feminism has focused so much on what the patriarchy and what men are doing to women. And that is fine, and we should. But we've taken the eye off ourselves, because under oppression, women react. Okay, because this is pushing down on you. So you must vent. So sometimes we react towards our own bodies. Okay, sometimes we react towards each other, all the selves, because the person oppressing us is far above us or is untouchable. So we react. But when feminism came, we took the eyes off ourselves, and we are just focused on, they are doing this to us, but we're not looking at how we are reacting to what they are doing to us. And I think it's important to pull back the eye. Look, keep one eye on them and an eye on each other, and find
I like that.
Uh, another thing I wanted people to look at is feminism and class.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And now, I don't know whether this is true of other communities, but what I've observed in Uganda is that there's middle class women are very quick to, to relate to feminism, but not working class women.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And what I've found, especially in Uganda, is that there's a sense that when women acquire a sense of power, that is through education, through money, through any empowerment that might come with women, we don't necessarily shatter the patriarchy or challenge the status quo. We tend to join the patriarchy. And so you hear women, working class women, referring to middle class women as men. You know, that we are men because we employ them. And we are not very different from men. So they, when we get jobs, they move into our house and become mothers and look after our children, look after our kitchens. And the way we treat them is not so different from the way men treated us, And so
Yes.
there's that aspect that, what, we are not equally women, you're more men than women,
Uh-huh.
So,
Uh-huh.
so and I think feminism has failed to address the issue of class within itself. And I don't think that is just within Uganda, but elsewhere.
It's here too. I understand. I absolutely understand what you're saying. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And the final thing that I would like people to take away from this is the whole idea of myth and myth making. So for me, in Uganda, masculinities and the patriarchy have ensconced themselves in this myth. A man is this, masculinities are this.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, they have created myth about woman and womanhood. And those myths are very dangerous.
Yes.
Okay? And so in this book, I'm asking, you know what? We need to shatter the myth around us. Okay? Because those were not created by us. We didn't make them. But at the same time, we can't leave ourselves naked. We need to create new myths. Myths that, help us become that which we wish to become. Okay, so this is why you'll find in the story that the witch has come up with new myth. So she keeps on talking about the first woman, but the first woman in my culture is called Nambi, and she's the sister of death. She brought death to the world.
Okay.
And so for me, I get rid of that Nambi and I create a new first woman. She came from the sea, okay? She had children and she went back, okay? And I take that Nambi figure and I make her a stepmother to Chirapo, okay?
Okay.
And anybody looking at her would be like, Nambi is supposed to be the mother of the nation. How can she hate a child? But it's until her husband dies and someone says, oh, but then she's the sister of death, that you realize, okay, that is a very problematic figure. But it's the same with Eve. This idea of feminine guilt. It's all over the world. But women did not make up those myths around themselves.
Right, right.
Forget that kind of myth. The idea that women can't park. The women, women can't park car. You know, there are all sorts of myths around us. Oh, we have problems when we are on our periods. Okay.
Right.
Oh, women
Right.
have smaller brains. You know, there are all sorts of myths around us, and we need to get rid of these myths and come up with our own. So
I
those
love
are the
it.
four things I like to
I love
readers
it.
to take away.
That's great. You know, thank you. That was really wonderful. I think that readers like are going to get so much hearing this kind of rich background that you got to this. So thank you very much for talking to me today about your book. I think we'll have a lot of readers who really respond to this. I love the idea of creating new myths, especially around women. That is fantastic. And really, thank you for sharing us that insight that people will really now be looking for as they're reading your book. So thank you so much for your time today.
Oh, thank you for having me, Rebecca. And have a good rest of the evening.
Thank you. Same to you.
V.E. Schwab is the #1 New York Times best-selling author of more than a dozen books, including the acclaimed Shades of Magic series, the Villains series, This Savage Song, and Our Dark Duet. Her work has received critical acclaim, been featured in the New York Times, Entertainment Weekly, Washington Post, and more, been translated into more than a dozen languages, and has been optioned for television and film. When she's not haunting Paris streets or trudging up English hillsides, she lives in Scotland and is usually tucked in the corner of a coffee shop, dreaming up monsters. France, 1714. In a moment of desperation, a young woman makes a Faustian bargain to live forever and is cursed to be forgotten by everyone she meets. Thus begins the extraordinary life of Addie LaRue, and a dazzling adventure that will play out across centuries and continents, across history and art, as a young woman learns how far she will go to leave her mark on the world. But everything changes when, after nearly 300 years, Addie stumbles across a young man in a hidden bookstore, and he remembers her name.
So thank you so much for joining me today to talk about your next book, The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, which comes out October 6th, 2020. So can you tell us what sparked the idea for The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue? I know you have an art history background.
I do.
So how did that influence your writing of the book?
It's interesting. The art history background really came in kind of in the revision layer, which is proof that you don't always get the whole story in the draft version. So
yeah.
I actually, anyone who follows me online knows it's been a really long process. It's been about 9 years from first spark to final product. And essentially I was living in Liverpool in like not a great setup. And so I had a housemate who would drop me off in the middle of nowhere for long stretches of a time. So I could at least like have a wander. And she dropped me off in a place called Ambleside, which is in the Lake District, for about 8 hours. And I went for a long walk in the hills completely by myself, not another human in sight. And my mind started wandering, as it is wont to do. And I started thinking about Peter Pan, which is one of my favorite stories of all time. I had just graduated college, right? And I had studied it extensively in college in like children's literature programs. And I always thought it was the saddest story in the world because it ends with Peter forgetting. And I was thinking about this, about time and memory, again, at 22, like the whole life behind me, I felt very expert. No, I was thinking about time and memory, and I was thinking about how sad it is to forget. And I was thinking, though, how much sadder it would be to be forgotten. I had just spent the last decade watching my grandmother deteriorate from Alzheimer's. And as hard as that was to watch her go through that, it was so much harder to watch my mom watch her mother forget her. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was just thinking about life and time and memory and immortality. And I thought I would love to tell an inverted Peter Pan. I would love to tell the story of a young woman in the world who is forgotten by everyone, because it really makes you wonder, what makes a life? What is the worth of a life? Is it the marks that you make? Is it the memories that you make? What if you can't make memories with anybody else? Yeah. And so it became an almost decades-long exploration of how do we exist? Is it really only in relation to other people and the impact that we make on them? do we have any merit unto ourselves if we are the only ones who remember? Kind of became like the person version of the Zen koan about if the tree falls in the woods and nobody hears.
Sure.
Yeah. And so what was born was the story of a young, and I write fantasy, so I knew I needed some kind of fantastical twist. And what came out of it was the story of a young woman who makes a deal with the devil to live forever and ends up not being super careful with her words and ends up being forgotten by everyone she meets as kind of the devil's way of wearing her down. And he's convinced when he does this that she won't last very long, because he's convinced from what he's seen of humans that all they care about is being seen by other people. All they care about is being remembered.
That's very weighty. I can't. That's really, that's a lot that goes into it. And how long did you say that it took you?
9 years.
You had the spark of this 9 years ago. All right, yeah. So, how can you talk to us about the differences between writing this standalone novel and the books that you've written in your series? You know, that's what our readers know you for, is the series. And so, how did you feel? Like, did you kind of, was there something to live up to? Was there pressure, or was it easier? Tell us about what the difference is in a standalone novel versus series novels.
Yeah, it was a little freeing, but really it was just a smaller version of the whole that I'm used to working on. I'm a fairly intense plotter. So when I sit down to write a series like Shades of Magic, I knew how the series was going to end before I began the first. So I planned the arc, and then I planned how much time that arc was going to go over. And while Addie lives for 300 years and has a huge amount of history in there, I knew I wanted it to be a single capsule entity. I wanted it to be unto itself. And the goal you discover when you're writing books, whether it's series or standalone, is that there's a really big difference between needing more and wanting more. Your reader should always want more. But if you do a series or a standalone properly, they shouldn't feel like they needed more in order to grasp the story, in order to appreciate the story. I think it's a really fine line. And my hope is that people will finish Addie and they will desperately want more, but not feel like they need it necessarily. And so I wanted that challenge. And also I had to create some kind of parameter for myself. And really, I was talking about one person's life. And it felt right, because this isn't really an ensemble cast. There are basically 3 main characters. And I wanted to make it feel like an entire meal unto itself.
Got it. That's a good way. I like that analogy. It's a meal unto itself.
Exactly.
I like that's very good. What's your favorite quality about the character of Addie? And what do you think that readers are going to like about her?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I didn't have to sit and think about this really until revisions. Like, drafting was the process of putting Addie on paper, and then revision is the process of codifying the character. And because my revisions were quite intensive for it, my editor, Miriam, advised me going into the revision to figure out exactly what was at the core of Addie, so that as I revised her and as I maybe changed some of the memories or reworked it, I didn't lose this thing that had been so precious to me. And it forced me to really sit with what was the seed, what was the source of it. And the thing about Addie LaRue is that she is filled with stubborn joy. There is an almost defiant desire to live, because that's really the only way she was going to survive. Is it starts with spite to prove the devil wrong. And spite only lasts you a certain number of years. And after that, it settles into this defiant joy, this defiant need to find the beauty in the world, because without that, she would become hopeless. And so enfolded in there with this stubbornness is just this relentless optimism to believe that there's stuff worth living for at every turn. And I feel like we need that now more than ever. I'm not always the most optimistic person, but I am the most stubborn person that I know. And so I was able to relate to Addie's stubbornness and turn it into a kind of optimism.
I think she definitely sounds like a character people are going to absolutely love. I know that I feel this talking to you about this. I'm like, yes, not always optimistic, but relentlessly stubborn. That's my kind of gal.
Exactly. Spite will carry you and optimism will pick up. But like, it's a combination of those things. There would be a way to write her character that was very sad, that would have felt like she was being dragged through the world. And I just didn't want that for her. I wanted, like, that gives you 75 years maybe. But to give a character who by the time we meet her 300 years in has come to terms, or so she thinks, with her situation, requires a person who looks forward to every sunrise.
That's really good insight. Thanks for sharing that with us. I know the
Sure.
readers are going to love that. So that's really about it then for today. Thank you so much for joining us to talk about your new book. Invisible Life of Addie LaRue is out October 6th, and I know we've got lots of people looking forward to it. So thanks for sharing with us today.
Of course.
Brad Thor is the #1 New York Times bestselling author of 20 thrillers, including Near Dark, Backlash, Spy Master, The Last Patriot, Blowback, and The Lions of Lucerne. Brad has also appeared on numerous news programs to discuss terrorism, as well as how closely his novels of international intrigue parallel the real threats facing the world today. In his latest, the world's largest bounty has just been placed upon America's top spy. His only hope for survival is to outwit, outrun, and outlast his enemies long enough to get to the truth. But for Scott Harvath to accomplish his most dangerous mission ever, one that has already claimed the lives of the people closest to him, including his new wife, he's going to need help, a lot of it. Not knowing whom he can trust, Harvath finds an unlikely ally in a Norwegian intelligence operative. Just as smart, just as deadly, and just as determined, she not only has the skills, but also the broken, troubled past to match Harvath's own.
Hi, Brad. Thanks so much for talking with us today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
So I'd like to dive right in to talk about your upcoming novel, Near Dark, which comes out July 21st, 2020. So this is the 19th book in your popular series featuring covert counterterrorism operative Scott Harvath. Can you share with us a little about the plot for this book? What's going on with Scott right now?
Sure. So it's interesting. One of our beloved retailers last year for my thriller Backlash said, would you write a bonus chapter for us so that we could have a special edition for your real hardcore fans? And it's funny because you get to the end of writing a novel and you're spent. There's nothing, particularly if you're like me and I write a book a year. But I did have a little germ of an idea and I thought, okay, this will be fun. We'll do this chapter where you think the hero from last summer's book, everything is settled. Scott Harvath is good. He's back home. He got his revenge. Everything's good. And then in the bonus chapter, you see someone halfway around the world take out the most expensive bounty, murder for hire contract on him that's ever been done in history. And it felt really good last year that I came up with something exciting. But what that meant was, it's like, I joke with my kids, it's like the Marvel universe of superheroes. Once something happens, it becomes part of that universe.
Totally.
So even if, you know, only 20-25% of the fans bought that edition and saw that bonus chapter, that still exists in Scott Harvath's universe. So what I did is I brought that bonus chapter from that special edition back this year as the prologue for Near Dark. So that became the jumping off point. There's now been this contract taken out on Scott Harvath, $100 million. And the person who takes it out on him says to the fixer of the contract, don't just give it to one assassin, give it to all your assassins all at once. Whoever kills him first gets the money. And that's page 1 of Near Dark. And so it races from there. But what's interesting is when you have a character like I do, if he doesn't want to be found, he's not going to be found. He's not going to take his cell phone with him. You're not going to be able to track him. So it probably is the most challenging book I've ever written because I've got a great character who preys on assassins and terrorists and things like that, and who knows how to hide. So the challenge for me is how do I keep the action going? How do I keep this plot line going with the world's greatest assassins chasing the world's greatest spy? And so it was a lot of work, but I think it's probably the best book I've ever written.
Awesome. I know that the series fans are really cannot wait for this one. For fans who might not know a lot about you and Scott, where does some of the what kind of inspires this sort of ex-Navy SEAL, counterterrorism, Secret Service agent. Where do you have a background yourself in that? Is just this something you're very interested in? Where did Scott come from, basically?
Well, it's interesting, and what's fun too, I should probably say about this book is I had a female colleague read it, and she said, "You know what? I have watched this development of you and your characters, particularly over the last 5 or 6 books." She said, "But Near Dark, for someone who's never read you before, is the perfect entry book. It is
Oh, great!
It's she loved the female characters.
Good to
in it.
know.
Very accessible is what she said. She said, I think you're going to find new readers that come to you for Near Dark and then want to work their way backward in the series from this one. But the inspiration, I received probably one of the nicest blurbs in my career came from Nelson DeMille on my very first novel, The Lions of Lucerne. And Nelson described my main character, Scott Harvath, as the perfect hero for the post 9/11 world. Because my book, Lions, came out just a couple of months after 9/11. In fact, we had this stop the presses moment where we wanted to go back in, where there's a discussion of the worst terror attacks that had ever happened in the country. And we said, we're going to be the first book on the market that's going to mention 9/11. In the wake of 9/11, with a character like this, we need to, stop the presses and get this inserted, which we did. But the character, so my dad's a Marine, no longer active Marine. His sister and my cousins all grew up on Coronado, just off San Diego, Coronado Island, which is where they train the Navy SEALs. So we used to see SEALs all the time when we were in Coronado. And we had a lot of law enforcement and military friends and family members and things like this. And they were always people that were men and women of incredible integrity, honor, and also the ones we knew had great senses of humor. There was this kind of dark graveyard sense of humor that with particular specialties, it seemed to be more prevalent. And so there was always kind of this wisecracking, yet all the great kind of values you learn of how wonderful it is to be an American and all this kind of stuff, but this kind of wink dark humor that always played very well in our house. We're a bunch of jokers. And so I wanted to fuse several of the people who I know in this community or across these communities, law enforcement, intelligence, the military, kind of into one character that was out there, pre-Jack Bauer and 24 started. The idea that we have the Geneva and Hague Conventions, and that requires signers on both sides pretty much. But even if you don't sign on the other side, we still afford you all the rules and the good treatment. We do that to terrorists, even though Geneva and Hague Conventions say you've got to wear at least an armband on the battlefield to identify yourself as a combatant. So this idea post 9/11, boy, do we have anybody out there who's willing to cut a couple of corners and break and bend some of the rules to get the bad guys before we can have another 9/11? And then morally, what does that mean for us? If we're going to hold ourselves to a certain standard, is it really okay to look the other way and let guys go and break rules and be unaccountable? So there was all that play. This just wasn't, a Superman guy with a gun that got to go do whatever he wanted. But I think Harvath pulled together what people were hoping and still do hope is out there. Someone who's willing to take the fight directly to the bad guys, but still has a code. Things still matter to him. Rules still matter to him, because if we lower ourselves to that common denominator of bad guys, people who are willing to hurt women and children and hide behind women and children, does it make us any better if we're going to do the same thing? So that's kind of the idea behind Harvath. Family, friends, and angst of the nation, and kind of who do we have out there fighting as hard for us as the bad guys seem to be fielding against us. So.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. That's a lot of information. I think people are going to love hearing about that. Everybody kind of likes the story behind the story, right? That's really cool. So, and this is a good segue. So talking about how 9/11, you were able to get that into the Lions of Lucerne, my next question was going to be, your thrillers always have this sense of realism about them. Readers love them because they could be happening in the world as we know it right now. It's very realistic. So do you think that you'll factor in all of the things that have turned the world upside down in 2020 into an upcoming book?
You are so funny, because I was wondering if you were going to ask me this question. This morning, as I was cooking my breakfast and making my coffee, I was thinking about this very idea. So a couple of years ago, I did a thriller called Code of Conduct. And the first page, the first paragraph of Code of Conduct says, if the president of the United States could get the virus, that meant no one was safe. And that's the opening line of Code of Conduct. There's this kind of pandemic that's sweeping the world, and everybody was afraid, and people were freaking out and running to Costco and buying, bulk purchasing this, that, and the other. So a couple of years ago, I did that. What I was thinking about in advance of our conversation was, all right, I wrote Near Dark. I finished it while the pandemic was going. But you always have spies that meet in crowded restaurants. There's no
right.
You don't wear a mask.
No more secret handshakes.
Right. You can't, brush by someone on a train and slip a little
yes.
in their hand. Right.
Yes.
So I was thinking about this morning, and I thought, okay, Seth Godin I don't know if you've ever talked to Seth. He's a brilliant guy in the digital space and marketing. He's famous for his yellow glasses. He's balding and he's got these big yellow glasses. He lives upstate New York. And I talked to Seth. I got to sit down and have dinner with Seth and Dave Ramsey, the financial guru. And I asked Seth just about, because he was familiar with my books a little bit, and my company that I do all my business through is called Thor Entertainment Group. And I had a bunch of questions for Seth about marketing and all this stuff and what life is like in the book business, particularly with the internet and ebooks and what was happening with indies and brick and mortar stores. And Seth said to me, he said, Brad, never forget that your company, your middle name of your company is entertainment. It's Thor Entertainment Group.
Yeah.
So what I sell people is escape. You don't have to read my books in any order. You can pick up any book and it'll still be fresh and evergreen. Doesn't matter if I wrote it 2 years ago or 2 weeks ago. The plots are always going to be very current, but I want to entertain people. So this morning I was thinking, well, what does that look like for the next book after Near Dark? Do people really want to read fiction that takes place in a socially distant world where you don't have masks? Or do they still want the escape of kind of pre-coronavirus? And I don't know that I have an answer for that yet, to be honest with you. This is something that we're gonna have to watch. If we get a vaccine, it basically wipes away that problem.
Yeah.
There's a reason I never wrote about Osama bin Laden in any of my novels, because I knew eventually they'd catch him. And then that novel is not exciting anymore because you know how it ends.
Yeah.
So right now I'm kind of hesitant to write anything that deals with the pandemic world as we know it, the realities we know it now, because I don't know that I suppose there's people that could pick up or it could write a fabulous book that deals with people walking around with masks and all that kind of stuff. I think I need to soak up what's going on a little bit, read those tea leaves a little bit more, but this is a tricky thing to figure out. And I think it's going to be an exciting challenge for authors going forward.
I think that's true. We're all still processing this. And as you said, we don't have the tea leaves or the crystal ball to know what the world is going to look like in a couple months, in 6 months, next year. So, all right. Well, that's great. Thank you so much for taking your time to talk to me today. I think our readers are I know they're very excited about the next Harvath book coming out. So thanks. They're really going to enjoy listening to you talk about some of the background of it. Thanks for your time.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Bryan Washington is a National Book Award 5 Under 35 honoree. He has written for The New Yorker, The New York Times Magazine, BuzzFeed, Vulture, The Paris Review, Tin House, American Short Fiction, GQ, Fader, and more. His debut novel, Memorial, explores what happens when a love story collides with the limits of love, and everyone has an opinion. Benson and Mike are two young guys who live together in Houston. Mike is a Japanese-American chef at a Mexican restaurant, and Benson's a Black daycare teacher. They've been together a few years, but now they're not sure why they're still a couple. When Mike finds out his estranged father is dying in Osaka, just as his acerbic Japanese mother, Mitsuko, arrives in Texas for a visit, Mike picks up and flies across the world to say goodbye. Back home in Texas, Mitsuko and Benson are stuck living together as unconventional roommates, an absurd domestic situation that ends up meaning more to each of them than they ever could have predicted. Memorial is a funny and profound story about family in all its strange forms, joyful and hard-won vulnerability, becoming who you're supposed to be, and the limits of love.
Hi, Brian. Thanks so much for joining me today to talk about your new book coming up.
Thanks so much for having me. It means a lot.
Great. So I want to dive right in to talk about your debut novel, Memorial. Comes out October 6th, 2020. Can you share with us a little bit of the plot of this book?
Yeah, it's largely concerned with the relationship between a Black daycare teacher and a Japanese American chef, both of whom are living in Houston. They're sort of on the dregs of sort of last tide of their relationship, but before either of them can make a definitive decision about it, the chef's father gets sick in Japan, and his mother comes to Houston to stay for the interim. So it's a sort of comedy of errors as they both acclimate to new environments and they learn about themselves. And I think that the overarching motif, insofar as there is one, was wanting to write a narrative about the communities that I hold dear, particularly the queer communities that I hold dear, and have it be a narrative that didn't make me feel worse for having read it or worse for having written it.
So I was going to ask you about that. What inspired this story, or where did the idea for the particular book come from? So you wanted to write about your communities and maybe about like people that you knew and things that had happened. So tell us a little bit about sort of the impetus for the story.
Yeah, the shorthand that I've been using everywhere has sort of been like a queer/queer novel, and that's just sort of what I've stuck to, which I think it checks most of the boxes. But I think that each of the characters is in their own way sort of amalgamation of folks that I've met, folks that I care about, folks that I've spent time with, and wanting to see those folks and those communities in a story that didn't hinge on the hardships that their respective communities may undergo individually or collectively, right? Because within each of those communities, there are love stories, there's humor, there's joy, and there's sadness. And I wanted to try and write a narrative that was as expansive as some of those communities are, or as all of those communities are, while being deeply singular at the same time.
Yes, sounds like a very a very human story, not humor.
Hopefully both, if I did my job
right, maybe both.
Yeah.
Definitely sounds very character driven. Is that, would you say so?
I would say so, yes.
Very cool, very cool. So I know that your short fiction and essays have been widely published and have won awards. So how do you compare the experience of writing short pieces to writing a novel?
I think that there were radically different experiences process-wise, right? Like I'm someone who writes in excerpts, like that's just how long my attention is. So in that sense, they were the same. But I was really lucky in that I had friends and I had a handful of editors who kind of told me up front that the process would be wildly different and not to, expect too much carrying over from one to the other. But what helped me the most, I think, was turning to the novels and the texts and the narratives that really made me feel what I wanted the reader to feel whilst they were reading Memorial. Books like Rachel Khong's Goodbye Vitamin, the story collection by Helen Oyemi, narratives that were deeply, deeply humane and deeply human and gave their characters the benefit of the doubt.
That's great. It sounds like readers are really gonna feel a connection here. I can tell just from talking to you about this that it sounds like something that people will really relate to. So thanks for bringing that book into the world.
Thank you so much, and thank you for taking the time.
Yes, well, we wish you all the success with Memorial, and it comes out in October, so readers will be looking for that. Thanks so much for talking to me today.
Thank you.
Thanks again for taking the time to view these BEA 2020 author interview videos. We hope that you enjoy them as much as I enjoyed recording them. I'd also like to take a quick moment to thank all of our authors for spending their time with me, and I'd like to thank the various publicists and library marketing folks who were able to make this happen. It took a lot of coordination with a lot of different schedules to get all of these videos together. And while I'm very sad I didn't get to meet these authors in person, in this Zoom era of ours, I hope that you found the videos entertaining and interesting. Now, I'd like to direct you to our website for just a moment. As you can see on our homepage, we always have the current list available. And then at the bottom, there is a link to download a clean copy, PDF printable. We encourage you to use those for displays and library handouts. And speaking of those lists, you can head to our archive and find all of our lists going all the way back to 2013. There's also a link on that page that will take you to a sortable spreadsheet of the master list for all of the titles. So some of you might find that easier to cut and paste the text from if you're using our list information for your website, your social media, or your in-library displays. The website also has our Hall of Fame section. We developed this in fall of 2018 and decided from that point on, when an author's third title would place on the Library Reads monthly list, they would move into our Hall of Fame. And you can see here, we've got lots of fabulous authors on it. If you click in to an author's profile, you'll see all about their most recent Hall of Fame title, their previous titles that made the list, etc. Using the other links on the top of our page, you can find out a little bit more about us and what we do. We also have a full FAQ page. You can also find out what's new with Library Reads, and you can find out how to participate in what we do. There's information there on how to vote for titles for the list and how to use us if you're a library staff member, how to get involved with us if you're a publisher. There's a link here to our marketing materials, which you are free to use online or in printables in your library. And then you can check out our resources page right here as well. Now that we're not able to do events in person right now, and our publisher partners aren't either, we're trying to gather kind of a little space of where you can easily link to all of the online things that are going on in the world of Library Reads and Reader's Advisory. On our website, you can also, on any page at the bottom, subscribe to our email newsletter. And I promise we don't sell your info or spam you. We generally only send out a few emails each month, one announcing the monthly list and one as a reminder to vote every month. So there you have it. That's Library Reads. Thanks again for participating and for watching our videos. Have a great rest of your day.